Judging by the esoteric way the system had described the X Factor, Ves felt a headache coming on. So what's all of this stupid talk about Prometheus and life? A mech was a weapon, a tool that humanity used to help wage war. In ancient history, when humans wanted to lift something heavier than the human body could carry, they turned to horses. When the cavalries had brought their weight to a battlefield, foot soldiers had had little means of resistance. With the rise of machines and the fuels that powered their insatiable appetites, warfare had evolved. The effectiveness of a single soldier was limited, but it multiplied when the same soldier operated a tank or a plane. Though the usefulness of the infantry had never faded, the primacy of machines over men in matters of warfare had reigned supreme ever since. The introduction of mechs to the battlefield reinforced that principle. By melding the human form with the awesome power of machinery, mechs provided humans with excellent means to wage warfare on the ground. It was over 400 years since the first mechs had crushed a battalion of infantry and tanks, and they had remained the mainstay of human planetary warfare. Ves thought deeply and couldn't figure out where the elusive X Factor fit in. It sounded a lot like the metaphysical garbage that had remained a popular topic of conversation among the more fanciful students at college. Why am I trying to figure this out myself? Ves asked, shaking his head. He sat down in front of his terminal. Let's see what the Galactic net has to say about the X Factor. The topic appeared to be obscure, but due to the sheer size of the Galactic net, Ves found plenty of sources. He watched an interview. Does the X Factor exist? The interviewer asked an older gentleman sitting opposite him. I don't know, the professor replied. In all my years of researching and developing the neural interface that allows pilots to control a mech like their own body, I have never come across a case where the mech provided measurable feedback to the pilot. The vague stories I've heard about the X Factor all originate from the mouths of mech pilots, who aren't exactly the most authoritative voice in the area of mech design. So you're saying it might be a myth? I try to keep an open mind, so I'm not inherently dismissing the theory. If someone can present me with strong proof in the form of hard data, then I'll happily convert. But from what I've found so far, the primary sources that speak about the X Factor are mostly veteran pilots suffering from borderline PTSD. Age, combat stress, and mental injuries can all contribute to hallucinations that mislead the mind into thinking a mech is doing more than it should. We haven't conducted enough research on the impact of the prolonged use of the neural interface on a pilot's psyche. All right, so you remain skeptical, the interviewer said with a nod. Let's change to a different tack. Do you believe that mechs are alive? The academic let out a contemptuous laugh. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe that mechs can think for themselves? At some level, they do. All mechs possess computing power. Without processors to regulate a mech's operations, the pilot would be overwhelmed by irrelevant data. They act as the unconscious mind of a human's body. Since the infrastructure for an unconscious mind exists, who's to say a mech can't support a thinking mind? Just because they have the potential to do so doesn't make it so. In your eyes, there's a small gap between processing data and independent thought. But in my eyes, they are separated by a chasm as wide as the distance between galaxies. We humans have worked on artificial intelligence for thousands of years, but for all our advances, we have merely achieved a facsimile of sentience. Computers still can't independently dream or formulate their own desires without an actual human to drive their train of thought. And never mind these complex desires. The most fundamental part of life is to reproduce, and I've never seen a mech become attracted to another mech. The interviewer laughed. That's true. However, they don't have to lift a finger to reproduce themselves. Us humans are doing it for them by constantly developing new models. Perhaps we might live in the future someday, where the mechs outnumber the humans piloting them. Are we developing our own doom? What do you think about that scenario? Accumulating war material is natural. No matter if you have 1 mech or 30, the pilot remains firmly in control. All the conspiracy theorists out there that believe mechs are the remnants of an ancient machine civilization don't know what they're talking about. The first mechs were developed using gradual advancements in technology. It's all neatly documented and traceable, without a shred of alien influence. The interview went on for a few more minutes, but Ves now had an inkling of what the X Factor was all about. I suppose most people, like me, think that mechs don't think for themselves, he mused. But can I still say the same now that I have the system? Ves had gone through a lot since he had received the system. He interacted through its menu like it was a software program, but he also talked to it like it was an individual. Certainly, the system responded like a living being, even showing hints of emotion underneath its robotic exterior. The question was whether displaying that emotion was merely part of its programmed response. Was the system programmed to follow instructions the whole time? God damn it. This is just like the chicken and egg problem. It goes round and round. He had learned to disregard problems he couldn't solve quickly. Ordinarily, he would ignore the issue. But since the mission forced him to think about it, he had no choice but to continue demanding his brain solve the question of life. Let's find a more practical source of information. I need more hard facts and less wishy-washy theory, Ves thought as he went back to the starting page of the Galactic net. The interviews with mech pilots tended to be more direct. Since they weren't scientists, they didn't fear ridicule for saying something wrong. Eric is my partner for life, a female pilot gushed as she watched the technician servicing her damaged mech. I can't count how many times he's saved my life. The more I pilot him, the more I become him. I put my mind into his body every time I connect with the neural interface. I don't believe Eric hasn't learned a thing or two from me in all these years. There were many moments when I got into trouble on the battlefield. If Eric hadn't mentally nudged me here and there, I might never have escaped. If it was legal to marry a mech, I'd be standing here in my wedding dress. I don't know why I'm still alive. The wounded mech pilot rasped as he looked at the stumps of his arms. I knew I was a goner as soon as 3 bastards popped out of nowhere. My buddy died. His cockpit was blown apart before he could dodge. He was my friend. He was a partner I shared my patrols with. Even our mechs had been a pair since they rolled off the factory belt. Something in me just snapped. I guess my mech felt the same, because he fed his anger into me while I channeled my fury back into the frame. Do you know what happened next? We tore those bastards to shreds. A shaggy-haired prisoner of war sat on a chair behind a metal table. He looked around the interrogation room with distaste. You want to know my secrets? You unfeeling murderers don't know the first thing about the mechs you're piloting. Have you ever patted one affectionately? Have you ever sat down next to one and told it about the stars? Have you ever stopped murdering innocent people long enough to treat your mech like a person? I guess not. That's why I was able to kill over 200 of you bastards with my mech, because I was never alone. I've chased the rumored X Factor my entire life, an elderly executive stated from behind an imposing desk in his office. I've bought and piloted over 3,000 mechs. Bipedal, quadrupedal, humanoid, avian, reptilian, whatever the shape, you can be sure I've piloted it at least once. I've also painstakingly tracked down over 100 damaged, scrapped, or second-hand mechs piloted by some of the most famed aces in the galaxy. All of them were excellent machines, especially once I restored them to their former glory. So, did you fulfill your life's ambition? The old man smiled wistfully. Perhaps. Perhaps not. I certainly think that the X Factor exists now more than ever. But is everyone destined for it? Perhaps us 3.5%ers aren't the cream of the crop we believe ourselves to be. maybe only 3.5% of humanity possesses the right aptitude to trigger the X Factor. But these so-called super potentates aren't all miracles. They need the right mech to unleash their full potential. But that's just a random idea I'm tossing out. And don't take it too seriously. A mech is lifeless. It isn't born. It's created. It doesn't die. It gets destroyed. A famed New Rebarthan ace pilot said as he stood resolutely next to his mech in a hangar. All of these myths about the so-called X Factor are just that. Myths. I believe in the endless potential of the human heart. When someone puts their body and soul into a single purpose, they can achieve 110% or even 120% of their maximum potential. The mech isn't the source, but the means by which pilots can achieve miracles. I don't disrespect the pilots who believe in the X Factor, but they attribute too much of their success to their mechs and not enough to their humanity. Ves had always believed mechs were machines. They were developed to be used, and if they failed to perform to spec, they were discarded as readily as a broken chair. He didn't doubt that a person might feel some affection for it, particularly after a long length of time, but in the end, it was still just metal and bolts. But now he found himself confronted by plenty of hearsay that suggested mechs were more than just unfeeling tools. They allegedly had the capacity to think, to feel emotions, to make decisions on their own, even if only faintly. Perhaps that was what the system was referring to when it talked about the X Factor. Though skeptics had provided plenty of viable alternatives, Ves found himself leaning more toward the idea that mechs could potentially be alive. But although his belief had been challenged, his mission wasn't to uncover the mystery behind the X Factor. Instead, he had to design a mech that incorporated the vaguely defined idea of the X Factor. How the hell am I supposed to bring life to a mech? Then he remembered that he might have already touched the threshold of the concept. He activated the system and pulled up his old designs. He called up the Seraphim's evaluation. Design evaluation, Fantasia 2R Seraphim. Variant name, Fantasia 2R Seraphim. Base model, Fantasia 2R. Original manufacturer, Kazaya Armaments. Weight classification, light. Recommended role, aerial marksman. Armor, D. Carrying capacity, F. Aesthetics, A. Endurance, D-. Energy efficiency, D-. Flexibility, C+. Firepower, C. Integrity, F+. Mobility, A-. Spotting, B. X Factor, F. Deviance, 44%. Performance improvement, 17%. Overall evaluation. The Fantasia 2R Seraphim features a superior aerial performance at a terrible cost. Its performance in close-range combat has been sacrificed for powerful long-range firepower. The mech is able to outperform its opponents as long as it has the energy to spare, which isn't much. The Seraphim further stands out due to its aesthetic appeal. The description commented on the Seraphim's fundamental attributes. Nothing in it hinted at anything metaphysical, yet the system had still given him an F for X Factor. Ves almost couldn't believe it. The Seraphim, a clunky variant of the 400-year-old Fantasia model, carried the potential to ignite a mech pilot's performance beyond its pinnacle. What makes the Seraphim so special? He wondered. The R2E, Phantasm, and Nomad are all based on the Fantasia, so why don't they have a whiff of the X Factor? The question nagged Ves. He felt as if he had the pieces in front of him, but he couldn't make them fit. He doubted spending more time on the Galactic net would help. A lot of the people who had researched the X Factor had never experienced it for themselves. He wondered if he ought to find someone closer. He considered calling Melinda, but he didn't want to distract her from her work. Serving in the Bentheim Planetary Guard was a great honor for a pilot as young as her. Ves had already reached his limit when he had asked her to pass him information about the Caesar Augustus. I don't need to find a real pilot. Iron Spirit is supposed to simulate reality. Can it also simulate the X Factor? It was an interesting question that he had no way of answering, but he was willing to bet it was true. He went to his store page and checked his sales log. Only 5 players had bought the Seraphim. Of course, 4 piloted the mech occasionally with mixed results. Only 1 player piloted the Seraphim frequently and with considerable prowess. He was a bronze leaguer with the nickname, the 7th Snake.